Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be hailing from. This is Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents, episode number 65. Today, we're going to be talking about an introduction to Identity Manager. My name is Eric the IT Guy Hendricks, and joining me pretty much every episode is one of my most illustrious co-hosts, Mr. Brian Smith.
Hey, how's it going? Not Nate.
So the funny thing is, the application that we use to put out the live stream, just for some reason, I don't know if it's a cookie thing or what, but every now and then it's just like, I see that you logged in as Eric Hendricks, but I'm just going to give you the name of the last host to use the software instead of saying, this is your account, this is your name. Right. I logged in today for sound check, and it was Nate, which was interesting because that's our guest, and our guest was Nate. So I fixed mine. So if hold on, if you can tell, there it is, right there. If you can tell, I'm not Nate. Well, with that said, I think we've pretty well teased both our topic and our guests. So why don't we dive in and bring in on Mr. Nate Lager?
But if you're not Nate, then who are you?
I don't know. I mean, new haircut, new office space, I guess new name.
Totally new person. Hi, everyone. You might recognize me. I'm Nate. I've been here before. I help host Into the Terminal on Fridays, and I was even hosting with Mr. Spinks for the Insights stuff last week. So yeah, hopefully people know me already.
And you would not believe the amount of hate mail that I got because you and John went to 43 minutes instead of 30.
We did in fact go quite a bit over. We felt bad about that.
So I'm kind of curious. Am I really that brutal of a producer? Because like 3 times in the stream, you guys are like, Eric's going to kill us.
Yeah, well, you did say 30 minutes, and apparently that's been a running thing for the whole series. So,
but as we've learned with Into the Terminal and the Insights miniseries, 30 minutes is relative. Sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's 45.
My watch is slow.
This show, we're actually usually pretty good. Brian's a stickler about that. He'll start like all caps text messages in the background going, end it, we're done.
Probably gonna happen any second now.
Like with this intro. All right.
Yeah, with that we need to move on, Eric. So
yeah, there it is. It is a weird day in the neighborhood, let me tell you. Oh goodness, you should have been here for sound check. All right. With that said, we're here to talk about identity, which, go figure, I must be having a bit of an identity crisis. So why don't we talk about what is identity management? What problem are we trying to solve?
Sure. So Identity Manager is, well, IDM, Red Hat IDM, Identity Manager. There's lots of ways. I'm probably going to refer to this throughout the show, but it's a package that's included with RHEL, and for a super high level, I like to say that it is basically Active Directory for Linux, right? It's the same concept. It houses identity, it houses permissions, it houses access rights and whatnot, all in a place that you can then take your Linux systems, not just RHEL, although we like to say use RHEL, and it'll reference IDM to get identity and all these different things, including things like SSH keys and whatever. So I've got a bunch of little demos set up. They're going to show off some of these things, but
So, but zooming out a little bit, what are we, when we talk about identity, what problem are we trying to solve?
So have you heard this buzzword zero trust? Don't cringe. I know like half our audience probably just cringed because it's really hot in the IT space at the moment because there are standards around identity security, and zero trust is one of these big concepts that gets thrown around a lot. And there's a lot of providers out there that are, deploy our thing and you'll be zero trust compliant. Well, zero trust as a concept is basically taking identity away from the edges of your deployments and bringing it more to a central place. And there's lots of other pieces to that. So in the case of Identity Manager, this is a piece of that puzzle, right? Identity Manager and RHEL can help you get closer to that zero trust world that everybody really either wants or needs to get to, whether they want to or not. But identity in general is, who are you and what are you allowed to do, right? And the closer you can protect that information, the more secure your environment can be.
Yeah, and I would add too, like, obviously, like maybe the simplest thing to do is just have local accounts on RHEL systems, right? But the problem with that obviously is then you have your identity duplicated across all these different potentially hundreds or thousands of hosts. And so if you want to do something simple like go in and change your password and you have a local account on 100 systems, that's not a good situation because you're having to log in and individually on each host and change your password. Or if somebody leaves the company and you want to delete their remove their access, revoke their access in an efficient manner, it's hard to do unless you have your identity stuff centralized somewhere where you can easily just go in and manage that. So I think anytime you want to be efficient, you want to scale, you have to have your identity centralized one way or the other instead of having it dispersed out throughout your whole environment with like a local user account.
Yeah, and a lot of us have been there in that exact situation, right? Joe, the admin, leaves the company, maybe under not so great circumstances, and then it's a mad rush to get them disabled, right?
Right.
If you've got identities dispersed across the entire environment that maybe you don't even remember what Joe had access to, right? It's really tough to go back and rein all that back in and make sure that it's been removed.
Yeah, and if you just want to like audit who's logging into what, stuff like that, it's if you really want all this stuff to be centralized so you can easily manage it and monitor it.
I can distinctly remember taking over as the sole Linux systems administrator for your company, and one of the first joys that I got to execute in this job was that when several service accounts were created across the fleet of database servers, they were not given the same UID and GID. So trying to copy files from one service account to the same service account on a different server was a pain because Linux would look at that and go, well, your user 1052 over here, but you're trying to connect to user 1059 over here. No, denied. And so my first task was to go in and figure out, basically build a spreadsheet of my own to go in and say, okay, on this system, here's all the users. On this system, here's all the users. Let me see which ones match up. That way I can actually go in, change the UIDs, then change the GIDs, then go in from like / and change the file ownership across the entire system. That was a lot of Googling and Stack Exchange to figure out, okay, if I use the find command with the exec, then I can find any file that's owned by UID XYZ and change it to ZYX. And I don't know about you guys, but I Starfield just came out a few weeks ago or about a week ago, and I got stuff to do. I've got planets to explore. I got better things to do than to go across 100 systems, 1,000 systems. God forbid it's one of these organizations that you have 30,000 servers out in a cloud or multiple clouds and change somebody's password or change someone's UID.
And not to mention all the follow-on effects, right? So if your job is to say that Nate's user is always UID number 1024, right? And it's not that way everywhere. You go and change that UID, and what else is that going to break? Like what did Nate own that now he doesn't own anymore? What did previous user 1024 own that now Nate owns? Right? It's not easy, and I wouldn't recommend taking that approach, but centralized identity can definitely be a solution for that.
Well, and then compile that with say you have password aging set on your systems, and you may only log into this remote data center, this DMZ, like once every 6 months. And you know that every time I log into the DMZ, I haven't been in there for 5.5 months. So my password's probably expired. So now I got to figure out what that was and reset it. Even though my production systems in the home data center are I change all my passwords there at the same time. It's just, there's as systems administrators, technology is supposed to work for us, not the other way around. And I think identity is a really, really good way of doing that. So you mentioned that Red Hat Enterprise Linux, that Red Hat has Identity Manager, IDM as we often call it.
Right.
And you mentioned that this is a way of starting to sync up some of those, tasks. What types, in some of the anecdotes we just shared, what are some of the things that IDM helps us automate?
So I think the most obvious thing would be identities, right? The username and the password, and not just the name and the password, but the metadata that goes along with that, right? And I'll show you in a little bit in my first demo. Basically, every identity has other data, like what's this person's phone number, where's their office, like what desk do they sit at, right? So this can be, and that's data that your RHEL boxes probably don't care about, but you might use it as a place of record for your employees, for example, right? So just to sort of expand on that just a little bit, SSH keys, that's I think just as much of a pain in the butt to deal with as passwords, right? Because someone updates their SSH key, which is probably good practice, and now they have 1,000 systems to go replace their SSH key on, which can be a pain in the butt, right? Especially if you miss one and then you delete your old key and now you can't get access to that system anymore, right? Or you have a history of a dozen keys in your authorized keys file, right? Well, Identity Manager can make that easier too. And then on top of that, it's what hosts does the person have access to? You can out of the box, Identity Manager basically says users can access any system that's part of IDM, but you can very easily change that with the host-based access control. And then of course sudo. Sudo, for Eric, as you know, sudo can be kind of a pain to configure.
We'd be talking about a Summit lab or
a Summit lab, or maybe an into the terminal that went very sideways. But you can define pseudo rules. You can define pseudo rules within IDM that you can then map to specific hosts, right? And there's an allow all rule that says like this guy's an admin, he can do whatever he wants. And then there's specific command sets, just like you would do with command groupings in your sudo-ish file. So I think these are all really handy things, right?
Yes,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, the other thing is like single sign-on. That's a big piece when you're dealing with, especially if you're dealing with external identity, right? The identity doesn't all have to live inside of IDM. You can have IDM be like downstream of Active Directory or Azure AD or a single sign-on domain, right? And you can even use identity tokens like the YubiKeys that are FIPS compliant, things like that. FIPS, is that the word I'm looking for? Or is it FIDO? FIDO, FIPS? One of those. That you can say, like, not only do I have a username and a password, but I've got this key that says, yes, I definitely am who I say I am. Here's my second factor, and that'll get you in.
So back to the sudo comment, just for the record, I think Scott made that Summit lab way too hard. So
yeah, that was totally Scott's fault. That wasn't me or anything that made that.
Oh, was that you? Okay, whoever did
Well,
it.
we actually, for those of you watching at home, we had a hands-on lab at the Red Hat booth at Summit this past May. And Nate's job was to build a troubleshooting lab on setting up sudo rules. And it was based off of an Into the Terminal episode that Scott and I had done a month or two prior that got thrown together at the last minute because we had a topic change. And Scott and I basically looked at each other and said, it's sudo, we got this. And that Into the Terminal episode just fell apart so fast.
So I basically took the exact example from that episode, and there was a guy sat down to try to do it. He was an RHCA, not SA, A, top level. Didn't get it.
Well, so I have to admit, I'm an RHCA as well, and I had a hard time with it. So
yeah, not. Apparently, we made it a little too tough, and it wasn't that. It was just like we want a user that can only control some services, right? We didn't want it to be wide open because that's easy to do. Right. We didn't want it to be something simple like show me a directory listing. Yeah, it was apparently a little too specific and hard to get right.
So back to IDM. So a lot of people we talk to are, they already have Microsoft Active Directory in their environment, right? So if you already have Active Directory in your environment, is IDM still for you? Can you still use it? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's in my brain, it's sort of a staged approach, right? There's a couple ways you can remotely authenticate RHEL. RHEL has a service in it called SSSD, Simple Services, something or other, Damon. I forget what the third S is. But you can make that authenticate to external identities. You can make it do LDAP. You can make it do Active Directory. There's a couple other directories it'll talk to. You can make it do IDM. Or you can use the IPA client, or the free IPA is the thing that this is based off of. So you'll hear the word IPA. I prefer free stouts better than free IPAs, but the SSSD can talk to IDM, or you can use the IPA client to talk to IDM, which basically just goes through SSSD. Or you can do a directory trust between IDM and Active Directory, or perhaps there's other directories. Active Directory is probably the most common one that I can think of that people would want to do a trust with. So those are kind of like the different ways you might authenticate a RHEL box, and why you would do them in each of those three different configurations. We do have a doc that'll be in the notes about, why would I choose one way over the other? And, some of it comes down to where is my current, that's a great link, by the way, Eric. It's only like 3 paragraphs.
Just type
It's
that
probably
in.
a good time for a public service announcement that after the episode, we always put in chapter markers and links that we mention in the show. So get your links there.
And with both Eric and I do on the same show, this is definitely going to jump all over the place.
But yeah, I think that link's a great one to check out. But the summary is, like, if you have a lot of systems in your environment, directly integrating with Active Directory is probably not going to be recommended. And we recommend you integrate with identity management and have that integrate with Active Directory. So IDM is basically kind of, in the middle between the two.
Right.
And I'd say during my time as a sysadmin, I've been in all 3 environments. 4, I guess. One where everything was locally managed. One where, before the beauty of SSSD and how smooth that has become, we used Active Directory basically as password authentication. It didn't cross platforms as well as it does today. So it really just kind of helped us manage passwords, which for what we needed was enough, because at least then you didn't lock yourself out of one system because you hadn't logged in for 6 months. But I've also been in environments where IDM is basically just a mirror of Active Directory. So you register your Linux systems with AD. Then I've also been in environments where everything is run through AD. There's even a wheel group inside of Active Directory that we created at this one company. And so I've seen it all, and it works really, really nice these days.
The thing I've seen with Active Directory authenticating directly to AD is you can do stuff like shim your SSH keys in there and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I understand, it requires modifying the AD schema, and that always sounds dangerous to me. I've never really been a full-on AD admin, but that just sounds like the sort of thing that I may not want to delve into. So that might be a great time to put IDM in between, right? Just in between your Linux hosts and your Active Directory system. And what you were talking about, how it essentially mirrors AD. That's basically what a trust is. It'll, identities that IDM has to know about. It'll make like a skeleton of that identity within IDM. But information like the password is synchronized from AD. It doesn't, as far as I know, it doesn't push back unless you configure it as a 2-way thing. But I don't want to get too deep into how that all works. But basically, it's the same deal for SSO environments, right? If you're using like Azure AD, for example, which I always think is Active Directory, but I guess it's Active Directory on their end, but it's actually like a single sign-on setup. That will also integrate with IDM. Do the same thing. It makes like a skeleton, and then it actually gives you a token. You have to go and authenticate through AD, and then it passes a token back. That way, IDM doesn't know or care about your password. That's all in the central place you store those things.
So a solution like this has got to be fairly expensive, right?
Oh, it's super expensive. All you have to do is pay for RHEL. In fact, you don't even have to pay for RHEL. You could get it with the developer sub.
So totally no separate subscription at all. Like if you have a RHEL subscription, you have access to.
I was surprised by that as well when I first started looking at IDM. But yes, it's included with RHEL.
why don't we dive in? We've been talking about it, and I know we're going a
Sure.
little bit off script here, but let's
Yeah.
dive in.
All right, so yeah, if you want to throw my share up on the screen there, you did already. Good. All right, so I'm just at the login screen at the moment. This is an IDM I set up in my lab. I'm using a completely fictitious domain of demo.rhlocal, which, by the way, IDM is very picky about DNS, so getting that to work was fun. I basically I have a home, you know, like an AdGuard DNS server that I run here, and I had to basically hand off the demo.rhlocal DNS to IDM. IDM runs its own DNS server, much like Active Directory does, and much like Active Directory, if you were setting up within an existing DNS domain, you'll want to hand off DNS resolutions to the controller, right? So same concept here, but I digress. I'm going to log in here. I have the password saved in my password manager, just because fat fingering passwords on the air is fun. All right, and when you log in, it brings you basically right to your users, right? But as we've mentioned, there's a lot more than just users in here. But I'll quick give you a tour of what users look like in here. You can see we've got Nate Demo, because I realized that Demo Nate turns into Demonate, which sounded bad. So Nate Demo is where it turned out. So as you can see, like I said, there's a bunch of extra information you can store in here. I hope this is all coming through well enough on the stream that folks can see. Let us know if it's too small, because I know there's like an eye chart going on here, because there's all kinds of information. But you can see, you know, name, initials, location, job title, right? This is all stuff that, again, your RHEL boxes don't care about, but your directory might, right? So you can use this as a place where you're actually recording, you know, your employees or whatever. It gives me the UID and GID right here. You can see that those are ridiculously high. That's so that they don't conflict with your local accounts, right? Even gives me my uses Kerberos in the background, right? So this is basically the Kerberos identity that for Nate Demo. So it's, you know, formatted like a Kerberos ID. Shell, you know, all the stuff you'd expect. Home directory. You could integrate this with like NFS and AutoMount if you wanted directories to come from a centralized place. I haven't done any of that, especially for this demo. I also run this in my home lab, and I've been tinkering with setting that sort of stuff up there, but I haven't gotten that far yet. But here's one of the things I wanted to really get to is this SSH key, right? So, and this isn't just for admins, right? Any IDM user can log in here and modify their own record with whatever you've given them permission to modify, right? Like you probably can't come in here and change like protected data, but things like your SSH key, if I'm updating my SSH key, you know, it's that time of year or whatever, I'm doing my due diligence and want to change it, I can log in here and change this myself. Of course, I'm as an admin at the moment, but if I click on this show or set key, you can see it's just a text field, right? This is my public key that I generated from any Linux system running OpenSSH. I just generated it with SSH keygen, and here it is. You throw it in here, you click the set button. I'm going to cancel because I've already got it set. And then there's my SSH key. And then when I SSH authenticate to a system that is joined to this domain, it'll just pull my SSH key right from the directory. It doesn't have to be stored or whatever on any of my clients, which personally I think is really handy. You can do certificate authentication as well. That's kind of a big deal for certain environments. I haven't tinkered with that extensively myself, but we'll probably be working on some more. My intention is to make a lot more demo content around IDM. This is kind of the start of that. So you may see more of this coming out as we go. Let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to show in here?
Almost as if there was a deeper strategy to having this episode.
No. What are you talking about?
So
on
the certificate,
sorry, go ahead.
on the certificate, since we've gotten some requests in the chat for system roles comments, we do have a certificate RHEL system role, and it will actually, work with IDM to get a certificate issued from IDM. And so I have a blog out there that shows how you can work together with the cockpit system role along with their certificate system role to have it, request a certificate from IDM that can be used by the web console. So when you log in, you don't have the self-signed certificate. So that is out there. And then to along the same lines of Ansible, we do have the Ansible free IPA package that includes a lot of Ansible content related
which
to IBM.
we might be showing later.
Yeah. So there's a lot you can automate with IDM. So you don't have to manually set a lot of this stuff up. You can use the Ansible content that we've provided. So
right, yes, because IDM can be complex and maybe even time consuming to configure if you're doing it all manually, right? So we try to make it as easy as possible for folks.
Well, and to kind of wrap up Terry's question there, so the GUI is not actually based off a cockpit. It is based off of, and I swear I just blanked. Gosh, it's the same framework that a lot of Red Hat tools are. Patternfly. Thank you.
Patternfly, is that what it's called?
Yeah, Patternfly. So you'll notice that Identity Manager, Satellite, a lot of our consoles and interfaces all look fairly similar. So it's based off Patternfly.
And I believe Cockpit is also based off Patternfly, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't that what themes
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's probably why it looks like it.
Yeah. It'll look very similar. All of our web applications should look similar. All right. So the other thing I wanted to call out, and I'm going to go to this next, is password policy. Right. You can see here these are the password policy variables, I guess is what the word I'm looking for, that actually apply to this particular account. Attributes. There you go. And this tells me that my max lifetime for my password is 0 days, which means I've turned off password expirations. Out of the box, I think it's something like 60 days. But you can tune all this to meet whatever policies your organization needs to adhere to. You can even set complexity and whatnot through here. So let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to go into here? I don't think so. Right there's that employee information. I can even put who my manager is. My manager is admin. There we go. All right. User groups was another thing I wanted to show. Yeah, I know I have unsaved changes. I don't care about those changes. So you notice that this user is a member of two groups. There's the IPA users, which is basically everyone who gets added becomes an IPA user. And I have one called client admins. And we'll get into why I'm in that group when I talk about Sudo rules. But the next thing I wanted to show you was, hosts. Let's talk about hosts. Everything that's joined to this domain, whether it's a server or I should say an IDM server or an IDM client, will show up in this list. Now you see I've got the very creative names here that are probably hard to distinguish on the stream. IDM CLI 0 is a client, IDM SRV 0 is a server, IDM SRV 1 is a replica, but also a server, so it follows the same name. What we're going to do in a little bit is I'm going to show you how to register new clients and how to add in a new replica using that Ansible free IPA role that Brian referenced earlier. So we'll show you that in a little bit. Let's see. Policy is the next thing I wanted to show. Password policies. You can see there's a global policy here. You can apply different policies based on different users if you needed to. I'm just using the global policy here. This is where that max lifetime was. Things like that, number of passwords you can have in your history. So basically, you can't reuse your password when you go to reset it. And this is all, of course, changeable right here at the central location. So no more do you have to use some sort of automation to go out to all of your systems or manually go out to all of your systems and deploy a password policy.
I was going to say my automation back in the day was tmux.
Yeah, right. So SSH-C, isn't it? That'll let you use an SSH command right from with a for loop.
No, I wasn't that clever back in the day. It was open up a session to all of my systems and run the command simultaneously.
Yeah, what I used to do a long time ago is you'd have PuTTY, you'd open PuTTY to 10 or 20 servers, and there was a thing called PuTTY Command Sender. And so it's a separate app. You could type in your command and click send, and it would cycle through all the PuTTY windows and send that command. So you want to make sure you're in the right directory and that kind of thing before you.
I used to manage my Linux systems from a Fedora workstation, and there's a terminal replacement called Terminator, which will let you do things like tile it in panes and stuff. And you can also, there's a broadcast feature where all of your open windows you can broadcast to. And one time, luckily, I wasn't logged into a production system, but I was trying to reboot a bunch of dev systems, and one of the terminals on my local machine and I issued a reboot command, and my machine rebooted, and I'm like, oh my God, what just happened?
I just took the network down.
Yeah. I'm like, what did I do? No, okay. It was
Wait,
just my machine.
just my jump box.
So yeah. Yeah, be careful. Be careful when you're broadcasting commands. But this
We
has
did an
nothing to do with
episode on
IDM.
stupid things we've done as sysadmins.
would
We
be
need
a
to make
good-
that episode happen.
That would be a good episode.
All right. So we talked about host-based access control. That's also here in policies. The HBAC rules will let you define who can access what. I haven't really, this is how it comes out of the box, but you can see how configurable this can be. This is basically saying, you see these radio buttons here. It says anyone can access any host. You can take this down to, specified users and groups. And I could say, a group of users can access this specified host groups, which would be a group of hosts, right? I'm not going to change any of that right now, but just know that exists. And that's how you would go about saying this group of users can get to these machines. Like, these are DBAs, they can access the database servers. These are Linux admins, they can access this larger set of servers, right? So that's what that's all for. The other thing I wanted to show was Sudo. Any questions at this point? I'm not even looking at the chat. Has anything come in that's related to anything I talked about?
Nothing new. I figure before we get into the Ansible portion of the demonstration, we can grab a couple of the earlier questions.
Sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to go into, yeah, I know I didn't save my changes. I went into sudo commands, sudo command group, sorry. Actually, let's go to commands first because the commands become groups. So the sudo commands are just what you'd expect, right? You give it the path to the binary that you want someone to be able to use via sudo. Now, I haven't gone too deeply into how complex these can get. With the sudoers file, you can go granular and say you can run it with these switches and whatever. I assume you can do that with this, but I haven't tested it, so I don't want to say you can or cannot. It seems reasonable that you probably can. But for the moment, I made one that's just user bin who am I for the demo that I'm going to show later. And I added that to a command group. And another thing that IDM does, which is really handy within the UI, is you see this green other tab? That's a related thing that affects this command. And in this case, it's the sudo command groups, right? Which was the other thing I was going to show you anyway. So the sudo command groups, it tells me that who am I is included within the client admin's CMD command group, which if I go over to command groups, you'll see there's a client admin's CMD command group. And if I go there, you can see it includes user bin who am I, right? So this makes it easier for you to jump between contexts, right? So if things that are related, it'll give you ways to get to see the thing that's related, right? And I think that's actually really nice that they thought ahead within the UI here. And then the other thing is, of course, sudo rules, right? I have a client admins rule. You might notice a theme here. There was a client admins group. There was a client admins, there was a user in the client admins group. And now I've got a bunch of sudo things that are called client admins something, right? So this rule basically ties it all together. It says these, so, there's just a name and whatever. At the top here, you can add a description if you really wanted to, and you can add options to it for sudo. But what I'm going to focus on here is who. We said specified users and groups. Notice there's nobody in users here. I put them all in groups, right? Because this is just the way I always administer things. You could directly add users if you wanted to, or you could say anyone, which I don't know who would apply a sudo rule to everyone, but it's there in case you need to. So the client admins here, that's the group that my user's part of, can access this host. Now, I said any host here. You can say specific host groups. I did any host just because I feel that the client admins should be able to access any host because they're admins for IPA or for IDM clients. And then, of course, what commands can they run? You can say any command. So say this person is truly an admin. You want them to be able to do anything you want, anything that they can reasonably do through sudo. You want them to be able to do. You just say any command. But in this case, I wanted to limit it to the command that I put in that command group. So you can see it says allow command groups. And then here is the command, right? Now you can also remove, right? So if I did any command here with the run commands and then went down to deny and said, but they can't, I don't know, change root's password or reboot the machine or something, right? I could make a new command in here that says anything except this command, right? So that's handy as well. You can deny specific commands or groups of commands, right? All right,
Where
so
this
that's
really starts to play out is when you're looking at an enterprise, even just looking at your standard 3-tier application where you've got maybe a web front end, you've got some kind of middleware, you've got a database on the back end. You can really start to kind of visualize how your identity topology is going to look. So you go in, you create multiple groups. You got a DBA group, you got a web admin group, you got a sysadmin group, and you start creating users, putting those users in those groups. Then you can create rule groups to say that anything for MySQL or anything that's related to Nginx goes into those groups. And then you can restrict access to certain groups, to certain systems. So the DBAs have no need to log into your web servers, just like the web admins don't need to log into maybe any sysadmin bastion host or jump servers. So you can really start to kind of segment off your infrastructure using IDM.
Right. All right. So the other thing I wanted to show was there's a really nice, and I just like the way this thing looks, is why I want to show it to you. If you go to the IPA server command in here, of course, this will give you an idea of like what roles your different systems are, or what roles you can apply to people. You can change things like ID ranges and realm domains and whatever. Trusts, this is where you'd go to set up things like an Active Directory trust or a trust with some other domain. But I like this topology one. Now, it's giving me a warning because I've only got one CA host because I didn't bother figuring out how to set up a CA replica. It's a thing you can do, and it's a recommended thing. But I have two hosts in here. I have the main server, and I have a single replica. And there's this really cool graph, which I like. I like how this looks, right? Let me see if I can move it up here. It actually shows you what each server is responsible for and what linkages it has, what's replicated, right? So you can see CA and domain are both two different colors here. Theoretically, if IDM serve 1 was configured with all the proper pieces to make CA work, I should be able to actually, like, I think drag, no, just hit plus here, from there to CA over here. And if everything was configured on the first replica to do CA, I can just set up that replication right here, right? So if I were to hit add, I don't know if this is going to work. No. There's pieces missing on the replica at the moment, so I can't make that work. But if all the pieces were there, you can literally set up those replications right here within this nice little graphical topology, which is, I think, pretty neat. All right. Are there any other things you guys want me to show in the UI? Because the next thing I wanted to do was dive into the Ansible FreeIPA role and show folks how easy it is to actually build this stuff.
So why don't we address a couple of quick questions that we've had, and then we can dive into a little bit deeper. Let me find the first one. Maybe one of you guys know this. IDM used to be Open LDAP. I think Open LDAP is one of the protocols, isn't it?
So Open LDAP is an LDAP implementation, right? That's a server. I believe this is Red Hat Directory Server, or no, 389 Directory Server underneath the covers.
I think the FreeIPA goes back to the 389 DS server. If you look back in history, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, I don't know that it was ever Open LDAP. I've been using IDM. It was like 2016. It was still in tech preview the first time I touched it, because I was setting up a Red Hat virtualization cluster and it needed identity, and that was the default place that it got identity from, unless you had AD, which we didn't. And I think it's always been 389. Netscape Directory Server. Yeah, there we go.
And don't worry, Conan confirmed our suspicions that IDM was not Open LDAP. That was a different project. That's right. Even today, the upstream of Identity Manager is FreeIPA. So there you go, Shantanu. Let's see. Maybe one of you all had an implementation like this. So AutoFS, NFS, and NIS. Is anyone doing that?
I don't know that anyone's saying you can't do that anymore. AutoFS is certainly like you can leverage AutoFS with IDM, for example, to do remote home directories. NFS, of course, is the core that makes network file systems work. That's still a very integral piece of RHEL for shared file systems. NIS, I haven't seen used. I don't think I've ever seen it used in the places that I've worked. I know people do it, and I know it is used, and it's a great way to synchronize identity across Linux footprints. I think that is probably the piece that you could say that IDM is meant to maybe improve upon, right? So no one's saying you can't do it. I don't think it's unsupported anymore or yet. Maybe it will be someday in the future. We can't see the future, but no one's pushing you away from NIS and into IDM, if that's the question.
Brian, our web console product manager, free IPA IDM cockpit. Let's get moving on that. Let's get that done.
Isn't there a plugin yet?
Yeah, hey, I'd be okay with it moving into the web console.
It would be a perfect fit. It has a really nice web UI that you could probably just put into a little frame in web console. There you go.
Yeah. There's some of these things. Like we do evaluate these from time to time just to see if it does make sense and how much effort it would take from a development perspective and hopefully the time that equation will make sense at some point in the future and we'll be able to do it.
Everybody adopt IDM and then we'll have to do it, right?
There you go. So Shantanu asks if there's a safety check to make sure that adding certain rules won't lock yourself out.
To be honest, I'm not certain. I haven't come across a situation where I was able to lock myself out, but I haven't done anything that I knew was going to lock myself out. So either I'm extra cautious or it's hard to do. I don't know.
And then I think the last question that we had hanging out there was, are you able to basically register a client to multiple LDAP servers? So maybe like Active Directory and Identity Manager separately. I can't picture a scenario where that would be either technically possible or where that would make sense. I think you'd have conflicting information.
In a big enough deployment, I can see where that might be desirable. I would think hard about whether that's the right path to take, just because I think you should have one source of identity or maybe one source of remote identity, right? Because you're always going to have local identity as well. But you should always have one source, I think, of remote identity. And you should instead look into how those identity providers can talk to each other to provide identity to the client. That all being said, I do think that PAM, which is the pluggable authentication module on RHEL, can support several remote identity providers. But I don't know, there must be some way to set priority on those, because if you have a conflict, how does it know? How does it know which one to pick? There must be like, this is authoritative and this is secondary. And I think that just goes in the order in which the authentications occur. So
the server AI module takes a D20, a virtual D20, and rolls it. Evens, it takes one. Odds, it takes the other.
Yeah, there you go. It could just do like a percentile or something instead of a D20. Make it, make the math easier.
So that's the questions. Why don't we switch gears here and let's show off what the Ansible role can do.
Let me stop the web share and let me find my terminal window. All right.
And then Manager Scott says that it goes in the order of the PAM calls. So it does do some prioritization.
Yeah, and I think that's literally the order in which you've defined them in your configuration, right? So whatever's at the top is first. If it fails, it goes to the next. And of course, local would be somewhere in that list, right? It's just another module within PAM. All right, so now we're looking at a console. This is my Ansible host, right? My control node, if you want to call it that. And this is all using Ansible core. I'm not using any AAP, although you could throw this into AAP, but that's not what this episode's about. So I just have a couple files in here. I've got an Ansible config, which basically tells Ansible how to behave. It tells it what user to connect as and whatever. I'm not going to go too deeply into that because that's like Ansible table stakes. What I do have is an inventory file, which I wanted to show you. And in the inventory file, we've defined a couple of host groups, an IPA server group, which will generally have one server in it. There may be mechanisms where there may be topologies where you'd have more than one server, but normally the way I do this is a single server and then you have replicas, right? So we've got one server, we tell it, there's variables that tell you, that tells the role what that server should do and how it should be configured. There's variables that tell it what services that should be run. And this is, I did a very basic setup here. This is actually directly from our documentation, which is linked in the notes. I don't know, Eric, if you want to find that and share it, but it's in the notes for our show today. I've used the Ansible Vault to store things like my passwords, which is the way you should be doing this sort of stuff within an Ansible playbook. You can just put in bare values here if you want to. It's entirely up to you. But I decided to try to go that extra step and put them in a vault. You define the domain that it's going to go at, the Kerberos realm, right, which are generally the same thing. I don't know why it doesn't just translate that, but that's the way this works. It asks it if you want to set up DNS. You can set this up to use external DNS, but again, I was trying to keep this as a simple vanilla install. And auto forwarders, I think that's for DNS forwarding, which is great if you're going to have your local machines use IDM as its authoritative DNS, because then if it can't resolve a thing, it'll return a serve fail. If you don't have, that is, it will return a value that is, sorry, I can't find that. If you don't have forwarding turned on, if forwarding's not turned on, DNS resolutions outside of your domain won't work, which maybe you want that. Maybe you don't, right? I wanted it, so there it is. And then I've got replicas defined, right? So I have IP addresses in here. You can use host names if you have DNS working or if you have a hosts file set up. Just I wanted to clarify that. And you see I have one commented out here. I'm going to go ahead and uncomment that because my first demo is going to be we're going to add another replica. But these are my two replica servers. They're on my local network. That's why they're in 10. Address space. And then, of course, there's down here variables related to the replicas, which are almost identical to what you have for the servers, right? Because they're going to be very, very much identical to what your servers are. And then beneath that, I have clients defined. Now, excuse me, I have clients also in a separate file. Or sorry, I'll get to that in a second. This is the inventory file. The inventory file, of course, includes the clients. That's another host group within the Ansible inventory. You see I have two clients here. One of them is not commented and one of them is, because guess what? I'll show you how to add a client in a little bit too. We're not going to uncomment that one just yet. And then, of course, there's variables for the clients, right? So this is all pretty straightforward stuff. So we're going to save that because we did make one little change. Now, there's also, you see there's an IDM servers and an IDM clients YAML file here. We're going to go into the IDM servers YAML, and in here you see this is really simple, and that's the point of the role, right? We tell it this group of hosts, the IPA server hosts, we tell it that yes, you're going to have to become root to do it. We're going to tell it where the vault file is, where I put all my passwords, and then it'll interpolate, is that the word I'm looking for? The passwords into that inventory, the inventory variables that we've defined. We tell it what roles to apply. There's one that says IPA server. We tell it to make that present. You don't get much more straightforward than that. I don't have to do anything crazy here. I don't have to install bind. I don't have to do any of the things to make all the services work. The role does it all for me. And then, of course, the same deal for replicas. We've got a playbook to configure replicas. And again, all of this can be found in the documentation from IDM, right? These examples are pulled almost directly from that. I've made slight changes based on my vault and stuff like that. And then, of course, we say what role, make it a replica. So we're going to close out of that because we didn't make any changes. And then we're just going to do Ansible playbook, tell it what inventory to use. IDM inventory, we're going to do IDM servers, and it's going to add that replica we talked about. Now, if I ran this without making any changes to that inventory, because my identity domain is already set up, it would have basically checked everything and told me, nope, we're good. So at any point now, if I wanted to add another replica, which I'm doing right this second, all I do is add the IP address to the inventory, and I run this again, and it'll have a new replica. Same deal for clients, but again, we'll show you that in a little bit. As long as we don't run out of time, we're getting close, aren't we?
A little bit.
Maybe while that runs, I'll show you how authentication works. Is this readable here?
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna go here. So remember, I made Nate demo, not demo Nate. So 10.0.0.0.102 is one of my clients. I'm just going to SSH in there. It's going to ask me for my key password. And boom, there I am at my client. You'll notice like there's no SSH directory here. There's no authorized keys file. I'm just here. It got the identity. It made me a home directory. You can see that I'm within the home. Well, here we'll just do pwd. I'm in home Nate demo. It created the home directory for me. I didn't have to do anything crazy to make that happen. You could pull that from NFS or something instead if you wanted to, as we mentioned before. And the sudo rule. Remember what command I said sudo should work with? Sudo.
Who am I, right?
Yep. So if I do sudo -l, make my password again. There it is. So you can see right here. Here's like variables and whatnot related to sudo, and here it is. The only command I can run is who am I? Boom. If I run who am I through sudo, it says I'm root. And if I run it without sudo, it says I'm Nate demo. So if I wanted to expand those sudo rules, all I have to do is go back to IDM, add another command, or change, what I should have access to. Or if I wanted to take away that sudo access, all I have to do is take this user back out of the group that gives it this access. Let's see how our Ansible thing is going. It's running. You can see here it's installing IPA replica packages. I don't know. This may take longer than we have left to finish. I should have done the client. The client's a lot faster. But this entire domain that I've got set up here, other than getting the DNS right, everything was done within this playbook. And I think that's super great because setting up IDM manually and adding replicas and adding clients can be kind of arduous, right? Just because there's a lot of moving pieces, and this makes the whole thing just super simple. I rebuilt this lab like 4 times preparing for this demo, and every time I rebuilt the IDM machines, all I did was shut them all down, revert them to my snapshots that I took before I started it, ran this playbook, and went and got some coffee, right? Came back and I had a new IDM domain stood up. It's that simple. All right.
What I really love is that a lot of our tools nowadays, whether it's IDM or satellite or even AAP, you can install using just an Ansible playbook.
Right. Right. And if you've got AAP, you can throw those playbooks within AAP and, throw them out in mass. It makes all that I was just showing you in Vim and whatever at the command line, it puts it all up inside of a nice web UI. Sorry.
Yeah, and with
one ring our doorbell, now my dogs are going crazy.
With Ansible Automation Platform, you can have workflows too. So you could have the visual workflow, first I'm going to create my IDM server, and then if that succeeds, then I want to create the replicas, and then I want to, create the clients and all that. So you can build out these workflows in AAP.
Yeah,
it's really cool how it all works.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example, right? I deployed it with one master, one replica, or one server, one replica. And say my environment has grown. Say I just want more fault tolerance and I want to add another replica. I just add it to the variables or add it to the inventory, run it again, and here we go. Can you hear the dogs howling? They're howling.
A little bit.
So
meanwhile, mine are both knocked out under my desk.
So Nate, we have a comment that is wanting to. They're trusting us, but they want to verify. What happens?
Okay.
What happens if you try to run a different command other than "who am I" over in the other terminal window? Is it
oh, you want to see it? Sure. Well, it should not work. I mean, if I do the sudo -l, if you're not familiar with that command, what that does is it lists all the commands that this user is allowed to run through sudo, right? So sudo -l is telling me that all I can run is whoami.
So let's try a sudo reboot just to make things
Sure.
make things interesting.
Sudo reboot.
Okay.
Sorry, user Nate demo is not allowed to execute sbin reboot as root. So there you
go, Shantanu. Trust but verify.
ls, same thing, right? So anything I try to run that's not in that list shouldn't work. Still running.
It's running some point up. We're getting close.
Yeah, the client edition is much faster. And I was going to show you how to add a user, but we're also out of time. So adding a user is also pretty simple. But what I wanted to kind of drive home was when I add a user to IDM, it's almost immediately available on the clients, right? So
I'll tell you what, we'll keep this running. And
sure.
Any closing thoughts, Brian?
No, I would just encourage everybody, if you have a RHEL subscription, you have access to this identity management functionality. It's really, really, amazing functionality. Try it out in your environment, and let us know what you think.
Yeah, and try it in your home lab. You can run this on a couple VMs on your laptop if you have the capability and at least a semi-decent laptop. I think my servers have 4 gig of memory. I wouldn't recommend that for a production deployment, but to poke around at and try out, then sure, like that's probably more than enough for a couple dozen users even and a couple dozen clients.
Yeah, I'm wanting to set up IDM here in my home lab that I've been rebuilding. We've got like home apps and stuff that I'd like to be able to have one one login across all these applications and being able to accept properly configured certificates and that kind of thing, so I don't get the browser warnings. And I'm turning my wife on to using more and more of our home services and whatnot.
Yeah,
so
that's the other
a definite next step.
That's the other great thing about the fact that IDM is built on open standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's Kerberos and it's LDAP. If you have a thing that can talk to a Kerberos domain, it can talk to IDM. If you have a thing that can talk to LDAP, it can talk to IDM, right? So a web application that, find me a web application, enterprise web application that can't do LDAP authentication, right? You can have it use IDM as its backend for password, right? Or you can have IDM be a single sign-on client of your main identity provider, right? And then everything authenticates to that. So single sign-on and same sign-on, you can get, like, this is a great piece of that puzzle, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And then one last thing I want to add to, Eric, is we do have a training class out there on Red Hat Identity Management. So definitely check that out if you want to get, go through a training environment where you have a lab and everything, where you can actually get hands-on and learn all the ins and outs of how all this works and how to set it up in your environment.
Not just a class, we got a full-on certification.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Maybe I'll take that one next.
There you go. Yeah, I need some downtime to. Someone needs to talk to Manager Scott to find me some more time to sit in some classes and play with some things.
But if I convince Manager Scott to give you more time to do stuff like that, doesn't mean that my own workload is going to go up.
Yes. I was just going to do a Control-A reassign to Nate.
Yeah. Let's not do that. Sorry, Eric, you can't have time off.
And then, as Terry said, if you don't have RHEL subscriptions, then definitely go out and get one. If you're an individual user, just head on out to developer.redhat.com. And you can sign up for the developer subscription for individuals. It gives you up to, I think, 16 entitlements for RHEL systems. It gives you access to things like Red Hat Insights, Red Hat Identity Manager, and of course RHEL itself. A really awesome tool. I use the heck out of my D4I subscription. Actually, I tend to use that more than my own employee subscription. So.
Yeah, I do the same thing. A lot. In fact, I think all of these demos, all these machines. No, I think these I registered to my employee sub, but most of my home lab is using a developer for individual sub, just because it's more convenient.
I'm trying to give your demo enough time here. I'm stalling, man.
Yeah, it's almost done, I think. But if we're out of time, and I think we are, just trust me, folks. It works.
Well, this is what happens when Nate and I derail the conversation 2 minutes into
Yeah.
the live stream.
Well, if I had better prepared the demo, I would have known how long it takes on average to deploy the replica.
Too much coffee.
I just know it's not too long, but apparently it's more than the 8 minutes I gave it. 10 minutes we gave it now.
But if you want to hear more from Nate, you can definitely catch him and Manager Scott on Friday. Hopefully it'll be the live stream Scott and not Manager Scott on the live stream on Friday. Nate,
Live stream
Nate will
Scott
be
is much
back.
better than Manager Scott.
So we'll be live on Friday at noon Eastern on Into the Terminal. We'll be talking about systemd, top five activities you need to know for managing systemd, whether that's starting and stopping services, systemd timers, and more. So that's going to be part 1 of a 2-part episode for Into the Terminal. Also join Brian and myself in 2 weeks. I'll be live from Oracle Cloud World, so I'll be hanging out with our partners over in Vegas. So if you're at Oracle Cloud World, definitely stop by the booth. I'll probably be there. I'll also be streaming remotely, so we're going to see how that works. But Brian and I will actually be interviewing some folks from one of our Red Hat partners over at Avasa, who are looking at solving the edge container management problem using RHEL and Podman. So we've got an exciting interview. Really excited about some of the partner focused episodes that we've had this year. So if you are a partner watching this and you have a product that runs on RHEL or runs with RHEL or even knows what RHEL is, hit me up on Twitter or just about anywhere. I'm IT guy Eric, so reach out. I think that's how we came across the Avasa topic. Was they just reached out and said, "Hey, can we come on the show?" And it's like, "Let's do it."
Is that the bar? They just have to know what RHEL is.
Yes, that is the
They
minimum.
can't come on over and go. So who's Red Hat again?
Right. It's that Windows knockoff, right? Somebody in Kansas
right.
City actually asked me that. It was like, or maybe not Windows. Maybe it was Unix. It's that Unix knockoff, right?
Okay.
Oh boy, how much time you got?
I mean, really boil it down, sure.
And then last but not least, Terry, or not Terry, I saw Terry's name in chat. John Spinks and I will be live again Tuesday afternoon for Modernizing RHEL Management. We'll be diving into Red Hat Insights to be talking about integrations and notifications. So how to get things like Slack notifications from Insights. So definitely don't want to miss that. And look at that, we stalled just long enough.
Hang on,
that
I have to show you the.
Oh yeah, we got to switch inputs here. I knew if we stalled long enough, it would finish.
The graph I showed you before.
Ta-da!
Now we've got IDM Serve 2.
And that's it. We're out.
So yeah. Theoretically, I can do this now because domain should be able to replicate. Let's see if I blow up my domain. Nope, look at that. See? I told you it worked.
Trust but verify.
Right. So yeah, it's that simple and fast.
Unless you're on a live stream stalling for time.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for sticking around with us. Thank you for joining us live. On behalf of our guest today, Mr. Nate Lager himself, my co-host Brian Smith, I'm Eric the IT Guy Hendricks. On behalf of Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Red Hat, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you live on Friday. Thank you all for stopping by.
Everybody have a great one.